Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're cracking open a truly fascinating medical case file. I was completely blown away when I discovered the hidden mechanics, the clinical realities, and honestly, the incredibly surprising occupational impacts of a condition that affects a massive percentage of us, diverticular disease. It's just absolutely captivating to uncover what's really happening inside the human body when things start to go wrong. So, let's jump right in, shall we? So here's a really high-stakes, purely mechanical question for you. What actually happens when the walls of your own intestines literally give way under pressure? We're going to tease apart the surprising and sometimes totally life-threatening consequences of this condition. Consequences that can take a patient from a standard routine checkup straight to the ER or even, no joke, ground a military fighter pilot mid-career.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the mechanics of diverticulosis. Second, identifying and diagnosing symptoms. Third, dangerous complications and risks. Fourth, medical and surgical management. And finally, number 5, aviation and occupational impacts.
All right, starting off with section 1, the mechanics of diverticulosis. Okay, let's dive into this and clear up the terminology right off the bat, because as we know, precise language is everything in medicine. Diverticulosis simply means that small pouches, or diverticula, have formed in the wall of the gut. That osis suffix, it literally just means they're present. But diverticulitis, with that itis suffix, that means those little pouches have become actively inflamed or infected. So it's really the difference between having a quiet structural flaw and having a very noisy, active disease. So how exactly do these pouches form in the first place? Well, it's essentially a cause and effect chain reaction of mechanical failure. Step 1 is a lack of dietary fiber. And yeah, your doctor was absolutely right about eating your vegetables. When we don't eat enough fiber, our gut has to work so much harder to move things along. And that leads us to step 2, high intraluminal pressures. The pressure inside the gut builds up dramatically. Finally, in step 3, this intense pressure literally forces the inner lining of the gut, the mucosa, to herniate or basically push outward, right through the muscle layers. And this tends to happen at very specific weak points in the gut wall, exactly where blood vessels penetrate the tissue. And here is a truly staggering number to keep in mind. While these pouches can technically happen anywhere, an overwhelming 95% of complications occur in one very specific location. We're talking about the sigmoid colon, which is that lower part of the large intestine just before the rectum. Moving right along to section 2, identifying and diagnosing symptoms. Diagnosing this isn't always a walk in the park because the symptoms can easily mimic other conditions. Diverticular disease typically features colicky abdominal pain, especially in that left iliac fossa, perfectly matching the sigmoid colon we just talked about. It also brings along altered bowel habits, nausea, and flatulence. But wait, irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, has incredibly similar symptoms. So what's the crucial differentiating factor? Age. Diverticular disease is significantly more common in older patients. In fact, roughly 30% of Westerners have it by age 60. IBS, on the other hand, typically presents in much younger patients. Now, when an acute attack hits, choosing the right diagnostic tool is quite literally a matter of life and death. A CT scan of the abdomen is the absolute gold standard here. It safely reveals the thickening of the colonic wall and the inflammatory streaking in the surrounding fat. Notice that colonoscopies or barium enemas are strictly avoided during acute attacks. Why is that? Well, when that gut wall is severely inflamed, inserting scopes or pumping in contrast fluid runs a massive risk of perforating the bowel. You definitely don't want that. Which brings us to section 3, dangerous complications and risks. It is honestly startling how quickly this disease can escalate from benign, quiet little pouches to highly volatile, life-threatening scenarios. And this brilliantly illustrates the major complications. First up, abscesses. These are pockets of pus that require urgent ultrasound or CT-guided drainage. Second, fistula. This is where severe inflammation causes the bowel to fuse and basically create an abnormal tunnel into nearby organs, like the bladder or vagina. Third, we have post-infective strictures, where scar tissue physically narrows the bowel. And finally, the most feared complication of all, perforation. If the pouch actually bursts, bowel contents spill directly into the abdomen, causing peritonitis, shock, and carrying a very grim 40% mortality rate. Another absolutely terrifying complication is diverticular bleeding. The clinical description of this is alarming, to say the least. It's abrupt on onset, usually completely painless, and frequently involves a massive amount of blood. Interestingly enough, while the inflammatory complications happen mostly on the left side of the colon, this severe bleeding often originates from diverticula over on the right side. But hey, there is a silver lining here. Despite how terrifying it looks, the bleeding actually stops spontaneously in about 80% of cases. All right, let's shift our focus to Section 4, Medical and Surgical Management. We know that high-fiber diets and antispasmodic meds can help manage mild, uninflamed diverticulosis. But the real question is, when is surgery actually required? How do we step up the treatments when things really go south? The medical management basically follows an escalating tier system. For mild attacks, patients just stay at home with bowel rest, meaning a strict fluids-only diet, and sometimes a course of antibiotics. Now, if the pain can't be controlled, it escalates to hospital admission. The patient is made nil by mouth to completely rest the gut, and they're given IV fluids and strong analgesia. If an abscess forms, specialists will use CT-guided needles to drain the pus percutaneously, right through the skin. But if a patient has severe persistent bleeding or a ruptured pouch, well, that's when surgeons must step in and perform a segmental colonic resection, physically removing that diseased portion of the bowel. But here's the thing. Surgeons really don't rush to operate unless it's absolutely necessary, because surgeon itself carries a heavy toll. Any surgical procedure inside the abdomen causes inflammation, and over time, this inflammation forms fibrous bands of scar tissue called adhesions, which literally tether the bowel to itself or to other organs. These adhesions can cause chronic pain or even a full-blown intestinal obstruction years down the line, requiring yet another surgery, called adhesiolysis, just to cut the bands. It's a vicious cycle, and one that doctors try really hard to avoid. Let's move to our final section, number 5, aviation and occupational impacts. Now, what's really interesting about this is where the story takes a totally unexpected turn. I mean, what is the exact connection between a gastroenterology textbook and the United States Air Force? You're probably wondering, why in the world does a simple gut pouch ground a highly trained fighter pilot? The answer boils down to the risk of sudden incapacitation. In an aviation or operational environment, you simply cannot afford a sudden medical emergency. The military considers diverticular disease a massive occupational hazard. An acute lower GI hemorrhage from a diverticulum can happen with absolutely zero warning. That rapid, massive blood loss causes hypovolemia, which is a serious drop in blood volume. And that leads to dizziness, presyncope, full syncope, or fainting, and potentially even death. Just imagine that happening to a pilot pulling G-forces mid-flight. It's a terrifying thought. Because of this extreme risk, the U.S. Air Force Aerospace Medicine Waiver Guide enforces some incredibly strict rules. If a pilot has active or symptomatic diverticulitis, there is absolutely no waiver permitted. None. They are disqualified from flying duties. However, if they have a history of the disease that has fully resolved without lasting complications, or sequelae as they call it, then a waiver to return to the cockpit is actually possible. But getting that waiver, it requires rigorous proof. The pilot must demonstrate a proven period of asymptomatic stability, and they have to do it without relying on medications that aren't approved for flight. They require a formal consultation with a specialist, like a gastroenterologist or a colorectal surgeon, and most importantly, they absolutely must provide a follow-up colonoscopy report. This is safely performed after the inflammation has entirely resolved, just to prove the gut is structurally sound, and to rule out any other major issues, like colorectal cancer. But we should definitely reassure you here. The military draws a very clear line between the active disease and the mere presence of the pouches. If a pilot has isolated asymptomatic diverticulosis, meaning the pouches were just found completely by accident on a scan for something else, and they cause zero symptoms, it is not disqualifying. It's the inflammation and the active bleeding that create the danger, not the quiet pouches themselves. We've tracked this condition from a simple dietary deficiency to the physical herniation of the gut wall, all the way to life-threatening complications and the surprisingly strict medical waivers of the U.S. Air Force. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing how a simple lack of dietary fiber can ultimately lead to grounded flights, emergency surgeries, and massive internal bleeding, how will your dietary choices today shape your gut structural health tomorrow? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.